You're listening to Lawyer Radio. Real lawyers, real talk, and everything you need to know without all that legal mumbo jumbo. Let's get into it. All right. So I'm here with Kristen Reynoso Jackwin. I keep wanting to say Jackson, but it's Jackwin. And Kristen does criminal defense work in South Florida. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you.
I have to say, I secretly wish that I had gone into criminal law when I was a young attorney, because at least from what I see on television, it looks very exciting.
Well, you know what? It's exactly like what you see on TV, right?
Yes, I bet it is. It always is, right? Like Law and Order or The Good Wife. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you do? What do you really do? Not what, it looks like you do on Law and Order.
Sure. So a big part of what I do is what I like to call compassionate advocacy, because as you can imagine, my clients and their families, they're going through the most difficult time in their life. It's very scary. It's very overwhelming for them. And sometimes you've got to go to war if you've got difficult prosecutors. So what I like to do is balance both of them. Really requires a lot of patience and compassion when it comes to the hand-holding and dealing with clients. I have one client who's away on a trip and, she's been texting me since like 8 this morning. And I had to tell her, you're in good hands. Don't worry. Go enjoy your trip and try to relax. And she's like, thank you. I understand. And I know that I'm in the best of hands. So a lot of it is almost like being a therapist, because you're dealing with clients who are saying the same thing over and over and over again. But I like to see it from the client's perspective, their vantage point. And they don't understand the law. That's why they hire you as a lawyer. They're so overwhelmed. And then you're also dealing with their family members who are not understanding the process. So biggest part of my job is really educating my clients, explaining the process in layman's terms of what's going to happen. I go to court a lot as well. I'm in depositions, I'm meeting with new clients. And then I also do a lot of things like this out in the community to raise awareness about who I am and what I do, because my goal is always to be able to help more people in really difficult situations, because I know that I'm going to do the best possible job for them and treat them as if they were my own family.
So is there something that you do in every case? Is like, I like to say in divorce law that I treat every client like you said, like an individual. I don't have a script that I follow. There's not like, oh, you start out with this one thing, which I think some attorneys unfortunately do. So with divorce, maybe you start out with a complaint, maybe you don't. Are there things that you always start out with when you're representing a criminal client, or is it the same? You kind of have to decide what's the best avenue to take. And how do you decide that?
So it really depends on the facts and circumstances that are happening with the case. I would say there's not one way every single time that a criminal case comes to me. I have them sometimes start at where there's an investigation and there's no formal arrest yet. I really like to get involved as early as possible so that I can hopefully avoid an arrest altogether. Give you a perfect example. I'm representing an autistic 9-year-old who, unfortunately, the way that the school handled him triggered him, and he ended up punching one of his teachers, and now the teacher wants to prosecute him. So can you imagine prosecuting a 9-year-old with severe autism? But my goal is to, right now, they're still in the investigatory stage and there haven't been formal charges filed. So my goal is to avoid charges altogether, to explain his condition and the triggers that unfortunately the school did not help him with. So a case can start like that, but I would say typically my cases start with an arrest, right? And that can be where someone goes into custody, or that can be a written arrest. But most of the time it's that they go into custody. There will normally be what's called an initial appearance, which is where they're required to appear in front of a judge within 24 hours. So I've been to court on the weekends, I've been to court on the holidays. It depends on the jurisdiction, but most of the time they do require you to be on court, even if it's a Saturday or a Sunday. But those are the typical ways that my cases start, and how I navigate them strategically is really based on the discovery that I receive. Because sometimes I'm sure you deal with it in family. Clients tell you one thing and then you see the evidence and you're like, oh, why didn't you tell me about this? So I'm very careful how I navigate my cases. I would say most of my cases my clients are good at being open and honest with me. And I always tell them, I'm like your doctor. If you go and you tell your doctor that your leg is hurting when your chest is hurting, then they can't help you, right? I need to know the good, the bad, the ugly to be able to help you. So if you don't tell me something, then I could potentially be blindsided and then I'm not able to fully help you to the best of my ability. I'll use experts if I need to hire a private investigator to do my due diligence on an alleged victim. I also work with polygraphers. If my client is telling me I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I prepare the questions. And then if it's a successful examination, I send that over to the prosecutor. So those are some of the strategies that I will utilize when dealing with a case, but it all depends on the facts, on the client, and then their willingness to, because, sometimes these experts obviously cost extra money. And so their willingness to participate in these types of things.
Well, I want to ask you some common questions that I hear again and again by lay people, but I think they're fair questions. And I'm not a criminal defense attorney, so I would like to hear the answers too. So the big one is I think people believe that criminal defense lawyers tend to know their clients are guilty and defend them anyway. So my first question would be, do you ask the clients that? Do you ask them, did you do whatever it is that you were accused of? And then what ensues after that?
So I get this question all the time. Oh my God, how do you defend guilty people? Do you know that they're guilty? Do you only defend innocent people? And my answer to them is always no. I defend our Constitution. I defend my clients' constitutional rights. Now, I think that criminal attorneys, we are the ones who make sure that we're keeping our clients' rights in check and holding the government accountable. So I take that very seriously. And it's funny because I had my husband's friends were two wives, and then I told them the type of attorney I was, and they're like, ew, how do you do that? And we were at a wedding, and I gave them this example. I said, all right, ladies, let's say that your husband gets really drunk tonight at this wedding, right? And he's out of control. You've never seen him like this before. And, he takes the keys, he drives home, and on his way driving home, he ends up killing someone. Are you going to say to me, Kristen, how could you possibly defend my guilty husband? Or are you going to say, here's the Amex, go save my husband? And their response was, we get it now. So that's typically what I have to say when someone is trying to understand what I do. Most people don't understand unless it's their family member, their loved one, who is dealing with this difficult situation. And you could be the most amazing person in the world. And most of my clients are. My clients are good people who make poor choices. I don't think that it defines them. And my job is to give them a second chance at freedom, a second chance with their reputation, second chance of hope. The process that I always do is I always want to know, like I said before, I want to know the good, the bad, the ugly. I never say, tell me what's going on, but let's go through it. What happened? I go through the discovery with them as well. Okay, maybe there's some things in the arrest report that are over exaggerated. Law enforcement does lie a lot. I've seen them lie under oath, unfortunately. So I go through that with them. Maybe there's some holes that we can poke, but I think that the misconception is that there's this technicality and then criminal defense attorneys are letting these serial killers run loose. No, that's not what happens. We are holding the state to their burden of proof, and that's an important burden in our justice system, and we're holding the government accountable to make sure that they do things the right way so that the police don't just randomly show up to your house for no reason and search it, or pull you over because of your skin color and search your car for a traffic stop. So I think that these rights that's why we're Americans. I think that they're amazing rights, and I take them very seriously, and that's why I do what I do.
Well, I understand that certainly as an attorney, but to the average person, can you explain, and you gave a couple of examples, but can you describe a little bit more with examples of what are those rights and the things that you're referring to that you want to make sure that the prosecutor's office and the police, that they do correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of them is, Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizures. So, you don't want the police to just raid your house and search it for no reason without any legal justification. You also don't want to get pulled over for a traffic stop and then the police just take free rein to search your entire car, right? I'll give you a perfect example. I'm Colombian and my uncle was driving in another state. They could tell that he looked Hispanic. I know I don't look Hispanic because of my blonde hair, but he looks very Hispanic. And the police, they just assumed because he's Colombian that he was a drug dealer and he had drugs in his car. So they got a knife and they sliced open all of the seats and tore through his car while he just sat there. And obviously he didn't have any drugs on him. But these are the types of checks and balances that we as criminal defense attorneys keep in place. You can't just go just because of the way someone looks or because of stereotypes and just destroy someone's property. That's not how our justice system is. You also have a right to an attorney and a right to have an attorney present to make sure that you don't say something. There's so many times where I've seen that someone has gone in what they think is to voluntarily cooperate, and then they go give the police exactly what they need in order to arrest them. And it could be something where they're innocently implicating themselves, right? And that's all that it takes. And sometimes their words get twisted. So that's why, as an attorney, we are our client's voice we know what they should say, we know what they should not say. And one small thing that you could say could implicate you. And you think you're being cooperative. A lot of my clients, hey, I had nothing to hide. Well, sometimes that's when you end up still getting arrested, even when you have nothing to hide.
That's another thing that I hear a lot is, well, if you don't have anything to hide, then why can't you talk to the police? Just tell the truth. What do you say about that?
Well, what I say about that is that the police, it is their job to elicit incriminating information from you. Their job is to make arrests. Their job is not to be your friend and to let people walk free. And so sometimes they take that as just arresting anyone who walks in, as opposed to really making sure that justice is served on both sides. Justice that if there's someone that committed a crime, then they go through the criminal justice system, but also justice in the sense that if there is a innocent person, that they do not have to go through the brutality of the criminal justice process. So sometimes those lines get blurred and they're so focused on making the arrest that it's hard for them to see the full true justice of our system. And I've had some cops who are wonderful with that. It's like anything, there's some good lawyers, there's some bad lawyers. The same with prosecutors who, they saw that there was an injustice in pursuing a case and they ultimately dismissed it. But sometimes you get those people that all they care about is the win. They just can't see past their theory of the case. And that's not the person that's going to be fighting for you on your side. Criminal defense attorney is going to be your person fighting for you on your side, making sure that they're advocating for your rights. Unfortunately, the police officer, that's not their job.
Yeah, and you said something interesting that it's their job to make arrests, but is it their job? And maybe this is just really naive, but I think it might be a common perception by a lot of people are they looking for the truth, or do they kind of, make judgments pretty quickly and then just look for the evidence to support it?
So I would hope that they're looking for the truth, but like I said, I think that it's really difficult because they're so involved in the case, they're so involved in their theory and their perspective on a case, and sometimes their judgment can get skewed and they don't want to see the evidence right in front of them that's pointing to the contrary. And sometimes, especially because they're the sheriffs, these are people who are running for that position. So they want to make those big arrests and keep the community safe. And sometimes they're willing to pin it on the first person that they see and not do the necessary due diligence. So I think that, like anything, there's some people that, of course, they care about the truth, but then sometimes their judgment can get skewed because they're just so involved in their theory of the case. And that's why it's so important to have someone to be your voice fighting for you on your side.
I
But
would think they get jaded too after being in that profession for a long time.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. How can you not?
Yeah.
It's
And
tough work. It's tough work. I couldn't do it.
what about you though? Do you get jaded?
No, you know what? I don't. I have a really good relationship with most of my clients. Yesterday, I represented an 18-year-old actually who just turned 19 and unfortunately just went through a Baker Act. But her mom came and brought me a beautiful basket of sweets and said, you know, I've had 4 different attorneys and you by far the most empathetic, the most compassionate. I really do love my clients. I set them up for success. Most of my clients are good people who are just going through a difficult situation for whatever reason. It may be mental health issues, substance abuse issues, anger issues, represented a lot of veterans as well, that suffer from PTSD. So I have a very good relationship with my clients and with the prosecutors. I was just in court today. I was chatting with the prosecutor. I had heard that her son got hurt at his daycare, and you know, we have a good rapport with one another. So I always say civil law is anything but civil, but criminal, we really are all a family. We all understand that we have a job to do. Most of my clients are not the stereotypical client that you see on TV. My clients are typically business professionals who are first-time offenders. So I've represented everyone from realtors, doctors, CEOs, a lot of business professionals. So those are my typical types of clients. It's not the career criminal that has a long rap sheet, but it doesn't mean that I don't represent those clients as well. But my typical client is a business professional who's a first-time offender.
And is it mostly white collar crime?
So it's a mix, you know, it's not always necessarily white collar crime, but the client is a white collar professional. But I have a mix of everything. You know, I've done everything from small misdemeanor traffic cases to international federal cases. I represented the general counsel of one of the FIFA confederations. I represented a double Harvard lawyer who was an attorney, and they were creating the tax structures that were used in facilitating bribes for the PDVSA oil scandal. So I represented him in DC and in Houston. So I've represented people all over the country, but I always love the little guy too, to help I represented a little 85-year-old lady who got into a car accident and gave her phone number. And then she got arrested for leaving the scene of an accident because the other guy called the cops on her, and she thought they had just worked it out amongst themselves. And
God, they arrested her?
they arrested
They
her.
put her in cuffs?
No, thankfully it was a written arrest. They did not take her into custody. But you know, you get those little ladies too. And so we were able to get her case dismissed, thankfully. But they were trying to put her on probation, and she was just like, I don't understand. Like, I'll take care
What
of her.
happened? What was the outcome of that one?
We got it dismissed.
Oh, thank God. I was gonna say probation. I mean, because I've had some exposure to criminal work. Some prosecutors will get a reputation for being very, thinking that jail is the answer to everything. And then you get the opposite. You get some that get criticized that they're too soft and, we're not doing a social service. Although from the way that you're describing your work, it does sound like there's a lot of social services
Oh yeah.
like involved in that.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so do you have how long have you been doing this?
This is my 10th year in practice.
Okay, so you've been around long enough to really, see trends, right? Like you know what you're doing by now.
Yeah, yeah.
Are there any things what advice could you give the public that you see people kind of do again and again that you'd say gives people like a little bit of advice about it? Like for instance, with what I do, divorce law, it's like I see a common thread is that people are really unable to communicate effectively with each other. What's something similar that you see again and again with the mistakes that your clients make?
I'll tell you, with my younger clients, when there's alcohol involved, that's when people will go up to the cops. They'll start being rude and nasty to the cops, cursing at them. And even though cursing is not illegal, it's most likely going to end up in an arrest, right? And so I've had several young clients who, they go and they say something to a cop, And guess what? They ultimately get arrested. And then I have to file motions and, we're taking depositions and we're in litigation. So I would say whenever you're encountering police, always make sure that you are acting with the utmost respect and you are being very professional with them, because they also typically have body worn camera on, so they can activate that at any point. So you will be on video how you're acting. And I just had a conversation with a prosecutor yesterday because my client was recording as the cops were beating up one of his friends. And he was like, well, your guys were cursing and acting all nasty. I'm like, well, cursing isn't illegal. But, that seed is already planted in the prosecutor's mind. It obviously upset the police officer and ultimately led to an arrest. It's not worth it. So make sure if you're getting everything from if you're getting pulled over to if an officer is asking you for an ID, just be very respectful. Kill them with kindness and make sure you do not curse at them or be rude, because that's when they're more inclined to arrest you.
Yeah, I've had that debate with people that they feel like the appropriate time to challenge the law is right then and there with the officer. And, the reality is that at least at that particular moment in time, the officer is the one with all the power.
Exactly.
So arguing with them isn't really going to accomplish anything other than agitating them and making the situation worse. And it does require you to have some restraint and be able to delay your gratification, because when you're in the moment, maybe you want to yell and scream and fight for yourself. But unfortunately, the time to do that is really later, particularly if it's something really egregious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some other things that you see people do? And alcohol, your comment about alcohol, definitely a good one. Obviously, judgment is impaired if we're drinking alcohol. But are there things that you also see again and again, like the average person, to just maybe be a little mindful of, other than keeping their alcohol in check and trying to be respectful of the law enforcement that they encounter?
I would say also with traffic stops, that's typically when a lot of people, why do I need to give you my ID? And, what did you pull me over for? That's also where I see a lot of arrests ultimately happen, because there's that initial frustration in the beginning, as opposed to just, it goes with the same thing. You just need to be respectful to police, even if they're going to be rude and nasty. Then what are they going to do to you if you're saying, yes, officer, no, officer, absolutely, I'm getting. And I think another thing too is just making sure that they know what you're doing, because for them, safety is always an issue, right? They want to make sure that you're not going to grab a gun or a knife or something like that. So, officers, they've got to deal with a lot of difficult stuff and a lot of difficult people. So they always have safety in the back of their head. So it's really important that if you're alone with an officer in a traffic stop or something, that you're being very clear as to what you are doing, and you show them where your hands are. Okay, I'm going just to get my license and my registration because you just asked me to do that. I'm just going there. It's going to be right in here. And let them know what you're doing, so that you're not reaching into your pocket and doing something like this and they think that you're grabbing a gun or a weapon, something like that. So I think just being very communicative with them about what you're doing and informing them that they are safe, because they don't know you from Adam, and it's important, and that's something that they're always concerned about. And that's where I've seen the issues that they escalate, because the officers are concerned about safety. And then that's when they bring even more officers and it becomes a whole big thing.
Yeah. But what would you say to people that, feel that they're being targeted because they're a person of color or, because of their race? What would you tell them to do when they're in that moment?
In that moment, it's, the same thing. You need to stay calm. You need to be very respectful. You need to be very polite, because if they feel targeted and they feel that this is a racist cop, and look, and like I said, they've got their body worn camera activated too. So if they're acting crazy and like a fool, then that's going to give them more ammunition to ultimately move forward with arresting you. So I would say people of color, especially more than anyone, really need to be the most respectful and so that they know that they're doing everything in the right and that the cops can't say anything about them. And the footage obviously speaks for itself.
So if that does happen to somebody, I actually don't even know what the procedure is in New Jersey where I practice, and perhaps there are some federal guidelines. Maybe you can clear that up as if this federal issue or state issue. But if somebody does feel like they were profiled, whether it resulted in an arrest or not, or maybe it was just an illegal stop, or maybe it was a legal stop that just went too far during the stop, what should somebody do after that? Are those recordings public record? Can you just ask for those? Like maybe in Jersey, we call it an Oprah request, an open public records request. It might be called something different in Florida.
Yeah, so it's called just a public records request that you could do with the police department. But what I would always say is if you have any issue with a police officer, there is an internal affairs department that each police department has, and absolutely report that officer. Unfortunately, what happens is it depends on the jurisdiction, but for instance, at Fort Lauderdale, I just finished deposing a bunch of officers. Their sergeant is the one who reviews the internal affairs issue, and then they make a determination. So that would be like, I work with my husband. My husband's reviewing me to see if I did anything wrong, right? So I think that that's a problem with our system, is that the internal affairs is your own colleagues and probably friends, and they're the ones reviewing you to determine if there's going to be any disciplinary action. I once had a cop, and he's on video saying, like, I don't give an F, and he's sitting there and he's like slamming his fist against the wall, and he's pushing my client, and you can see that he's clearly the one being physical, and then ultimately charge my client with battery on a law enforcement officer. So those are great things, tools that we use as criminal defense attorneys, is we pull the internal affairs file. It's something that you can call and just say, I need to speak to internal affairs, and you can pull it on any officer. They'll send it over to you. And this specific officer, I don't remember which department he was in, but it was in Miami, and he had 30 different accusations against him. Everything from excessive use of force to racist slurs, horrible things. And out of all of them, I think there was only one complaint that was substantiated, is what it's called, the equivalent of like a conviction in criminal court. So
what was the penalty?
I don't recall, because this was years ago, but yeah, there was, essentially, I don't think it said, but it just said that it was a substantiated complaint, right?
That's pretty incredible that somebody could have that many, because it
Yep.
really is hard to believe that there were so many, but
Yep.
only one was substantiated.
It would be like, imagine having 30 criminal cases and you only get convicted on one, and then the rest are dismissed. So it's absurd. And there's another sergeant that I deposed. He had 70 pages, not complaints, 70 pages worth of issues, and he had 0 that were substantiated, and he kept telling me that. And when I questioned him about it, he refused to answer my questions. So
Police misconduct, or is that something you refer out?
no, that's not anything I handle, but there's always a potential for a civil rights case, but that I don't do. So I always refer that type of work out.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We're probably going off into definitely down a rabbit hole that could be a whole other topic of conversation. There are a couple of things that I wanted to ask you. I've asked other attorneys, and I've never heard this in law school. I hear laymen say it all the time, and I don't know where it comes from. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Have you heard that? It's always on television. You have never heard that. Or maybe it's not a thing anymore. Maybe they finally got the memo that it's not really a thing. Because people would always say that to me. I'm like, I never learned that in law school.
Yeah, I didn't learn that in law school either.
I have no idea where that comes from. Okay, and then also this idea that you get one phone call. If you get arrested, if you're in the interrogation room, you get one phone call. Is that a real thing? Is that just a courtesy? What is that about?
So it really depends on the arresting agency. I've had some officers that have allowed people to keep their cell phones on them and make a call. So it's really their discretion. You know, if they want to give you one call, you typically get one phone call, so that is actually accurate. But sometimes they'll give you more as well if you can't get a hold of someone. It's all discretionary.
This is all very, mysterious to people unless they've studied
Yeah.
up on it or talked to someone like you. But they all seem to know that they're entitled to a phone call. So I always thought that was interesting. Now, with respect to Miranda rights, I think that's really important. It's always amazes me. And again, I'm comparing this to television, but I think it's probably represents what a lot of people think it's really like is why do they always go to the police and just talk very openly. They just spill it all. Partly maybe that's because there is an attitude of if I didn't do anything wrong and I just tell the truth, then the truth shall set me free. But you also see people that did do something wrong that somehow think that talking is going that they're gonna spin a web that's just gonna exonerate them and with their I don't know their impressive sales skills, I guess. So what would you tell people when the police show up at their door, ask them to come down to the station and just talk to them? We'll go easy on you if you just tell us the truth. Would you ever advise someone, sure, go do that? That's a really good idea.
No, keep your mouth shut and say, call my lawyer, call Kristen. That's what you say. You give them your lawyer's number. I'm not saying anything. Lawyer, lawyer, lawyer. Say, I want my lawyer. I'm not saying anything to you. I think it's important to make that clear because look, I think that people know that they shouldn't speak to the cops, even from just watching TV. People can probably recite the Miranda warnings from TV. So they know their rights, but they don't actually understand them and they don't understand the purpose. It's just a weird legal saying, right?
Yeah.
And I think once you're under the stress of the moment, when you have an officer and, these officers, like I said, they're trained to get information out of you. So it's a lot of times you'll have the good cop, bad cop, and one guy's being your friend, and you feel if you cooperate, then they're going to go lighter on you. Sometimes officers will actually tell you, well, if you cooperate, then it's not going to be as bad, or, there's always the potential to suppress anything that's said. But keep your mouth shut and say that, make it very clear that you want a lawyer. Because if you don't, then there's a potential that anything you say will hold up in court. So my advice is almost always, it's very rare that I would say to go and speak to them, but keep your mouth shut.
And when would you actually go with a client and let them speak to the police? Because I see that happen a lot too, on television, in real life, but the attorney will be present. So what do you do that? And what are you really doing while you're sitting there?
So I don't do that. I mean, there's never been a time where I've gone, scheduled an appointment, and I'm very strategic. Normally what I do with police officers, hopefully they're not listening to this right now, but what I will do is if there's an ongoing investigation, I call them. I try and get as much information from them as I can so that I know where the case is going. I know how they view my client. And I see if they have a warrant for my client's arrest. If they don't, then I know that they're luring them in just to try and get an admission to ultimately be able to move the case forward. So I'm always very strategic in not having my client go in and speak to the police. I would say the only time that you would is, I'm not sure if you deal with DCF situations, but with DCF situations, they will keep your kids from you if you don't go in and speak to them. So it's a little different than your typical police department. Also in federal cases, if it's a situation where I know that my client is dead to rights and we have absolutely no leverage, first and foremost, I will try and get immunity, and I have gotten Department of Justice immunity in Washington, D.C. for my clients before. So you can imagine it's not very easy to do, but that gives them full immunity in all jurisdictions in the United States. But there is limited immunity as well. So at the very least, I will first get immunity for my client and then have them go in and speak, because that obviously minimizes the risk. And if we know we have no leverage and the strategy is to have them go in and speak then the reason for that would be because to show that they're good faith and that they're cooperating with the government. And if I know that it's a federal case where they're going to be sent, they're going to, we're not taking it to trial, then those points that you're getting up front are very helpful in the ultimate sentencing. So being proactive and going in and speaking with the government could potentially be a good thing, but it's never a good idea to just go in by yourself and just spill your guts to the cops. Always speak to a lawyer, and then you and your lawyer will figure out strategically if it's a good idea for you, but never go in by yourself.
And when are they entitled to, because we all know the last part of the Miranda warning is if you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you have to actually have a court proceeding to do that? Like, does there have been a grand jury proceeding already? When can you elect that?
So it's when meaningful proceedings have commenced. So there's there's definitely difference of opinion, but that's when you're actually going into hearings and things like that. So not even at the investigatory stage.
Okay. Because obviously having somebody like you requires money.
Yeah.
So people that don't have that, I kind of feel bad for them that their rights can be compromised just because they don't have somebody like you looking out for them.
Yeah. I mean, if you do ask for a lawyer when they're trying to investigate you, they could bring a public defender as well, if that's, you can't hire your own lawyer. But like anything, unfortunately, you get what you pay for. And I've seen a lot of clients that have come to me after they've had a public defender. I'm not saying public defenders are bad, but after they've had a public defender or even a private attorney that takes their money and doesn't do very much and then shoves a plea down their throat. So I actually have a law clerk that's working with me right now, and she came from a firm where they take your money. And all that the attorney does is he sends an email and gets an offer and he shoves it down their throat. So it's, that's just the unfortunate reality of our system, is that you do get what you pay for, but there are phenomenal public defenders. I've had many who have worked with me and gone on to do public defense work, but it's tough because they have so many cases, and it's hard to juggle everything. I've got one attorney who actually would refer me all of the cases when the family was able to help. He's like, Kristen, I love to handle it, but I've got hundreds of other cases, and I know you're going to take care of them because you're not a mill like I have to be. So I think finding the right lawyer, it's not going to be cheap. It's definitely going to be expensive, but freedom is priceless.
I will say, for the benefit of people listening, is that I agree with you 100%. You get what you pay for. Even with the work that I do, you get what you pay for. I think with any professional, whatever the issue is, if you need to hire a professional, it's because you need a professional, right? And you need a good one. You need someone who works in that practice area all the time. You wouldn't have a podiatrist do your open heart surgery.
Yep.
So don't hire someone to do a criminal proceeding for you, or a divorce or a will, anything really that only dabbles in it, because the dabblers, they don't know what they don't know. It might seem like it's something easy. Or the other thing that I hear a lot is, oh, well, we have a friend of the family. He does corporate stuff, but he's going to give us a discount. He's good. He's fine. It's like, no, he's not fine, because he doesn't do that area of law. He doesn't even know what he doesn't know. So he might have the very best intentions, but he doesn't really work actively in that area of law. So I beg people, please hire the person that does this kind of work all the time. Honestly, they probably are charging more than you want to pay, because that's what they do, and they become good at it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, totally agree with that 100%. And I also want to say about public defenders, having known some that were wonderful attorneys. I know that they get a bad rap. They actually call them public pretenders. Have you heard that? Do they talk?
I've had so many people say, I don't have an attorney. I'm like, yes, you do. You have a public defender. They're not a real attorney. I'm like, My God, these poor people, every day they're being told that they're not real attorneys. And
I know. Well, I will say about them that some of them, a lot of them are just like any attorney. You know, there's a good attorneys and there's not so good attorneys.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's true of the public defenders. But I know some that are really excellent, absolutely love what they do. They
Yeah.
love being public defenders and they, you know, if you were paying them out of your pocket, they would be expensive
Oh,
because they're
yeah,
really good
sure.
and they know what they're doing. And I would just say, make sure that you feel comfortable with them, that they're listening to you, as with
Yeah.
any attorney. Make sure
Yeah,
that you feel like
absolutely.
they're listening to you. And with that, I feel like there's so many other things we could talk about, but I know that you are a busy lady and you have justice to defend. But if anybody's interested in looking Kristen up, you can find her at jackwinlegal.com. And I will have links to your socials and your website in the show notes. Thank you for being here. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
some of your wisdom and love to have you back on again another time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was awesome and looking forward to meeting you in person whenever you're in Florida.
I would love that. You're listening to Lawyer Radio, the official podcast of Wolf Esquires. Follow us on Instagram at Wolf Esquires. If you like what you heard, subscribe and share. And if you need a lawyer who actually gets it, you know where to find us. This podcast is for informational purposes only. It's not legal advice, and listening doesn't make us your lawyers. If you need real legal advice, call a lawyer, preferably one who knows what they're doing.